Imagine this. You spend years building something with your hands in your mind, every decision calculated, every risk taken with intention. Your identity becomes inseparable from what you've created. And then, in a single moment, it's gone. Not because you were careless, not because you failed, but because the world decided differently. More than 2,000 years ago, a man named Zeno learned this lesson the hard way. He was a wealthy trader from Cyprus, respected and successful by every standard of his time. His life followed a clear trajectory: growth, stability, security, until one ordinary voyage changed everything. On a journey across the sea, his ship sank. The cargo vanished beneath the water. His wealth disappeared with it. Years of effort dissolved into silence. No warning, no second chance, no explanation. In one breath, Zeno went from having everything to having nothing. Now pause for a moment and place yourself there. What would happen inside you if your savings vanished overnight? If your career collapsed for reasons you couldn't control? If everything you thought made you someone was stripped away without asking your consent? Most people would call it unfair. Some would call it tragic. Many would never recover. But Zeno didn't break. Instead of fighting reality, he studied it. Instead of raging against fate, he observed his own mind. And in that quiet space, between loss and reaction, he discovered something most people never see: that our suffering doesn't come from events themselves, but from the meaning we attach to them. Welcome to Stoic Silence Wisdom. This channel exists for moments like that. Moments when life reminds you that control is an illusion, but response is not. Zeno's shipwreck was not just a personal disaster. It was the beginning of a question that still haunts us today. How should a human being live in a world where nothing is guaranteed? That question didn't produce comfort, it produced clarity. And from that clarity emerged Stoicism, a philosophy forged not in comfort, but in loss. Before we go any further, if you're searching for calm in a chaotic world, clarity in uncertainty, and strength without noise, consider subscribing to Stoic Silence Wisdom. Your support gives this channel the energy to continue creating reflections like this, slow, honest, and meant to stay with you long after the video ends. Because the story of that shipwreck is not ancient history, it's a mirror, and what you see in it may change how you face everything that comes next. What Zeno discovered in the aftermath of that loss was not a way to avoid pain, but a way to understand it. And that understanding is where Stoicism truly begins. Stoicism is often mistaken for emotional numbness, as if strength meant the absence of feeling. But the Stoics never believed that emotions were the enemy. What they warned against was being ruled by them without examination. To live well, in their view, was not to shut down the inner world, but to bring order to it. At the center of Stoicism is a distinction that sounds simple, yet changes everything once it is truly understood. There are things that are up to us and things that are not. Our thoughts, our judgments, our choices, and our actions belong to us. Outcomes, opinions, accidents, and time do not. Most human suffering begins the moment we blur that line. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what was never ours to command. We replay conversations we cannot change. We attach our worth to results that depend on luck, timing, or other people. We resist reality and then wonder why reality feels so heavy. Stoicism does not ask you to approve of what happens. It asks you to see it clearly. Acceptance, in the Stoic sense, is not surrender. It is precision. It is the decision to stop arguing with facts and to redirect your energy toward what still remains within your power. This is where the idea of indifference is often misunderstood. The Stoics did not mean indifference to life, to people, or to meaning. They meant indifference to what does not define your character. Wealth, status, recognition, even comfort. These are unstable by nature. To build your identity on them is to place your peace in hands you do not control. Emotions still arise. Fear still appears. Anger still knocks. Stoicism does not deny these reactions. It simply refuses to treat them as commands. An emotion is information, not instruction. It tells you something about how you are interpreting an event, not what you must do next. Between what happens and how you respond, there is a pause. Most people rush past it. Stoicism trains you to stay there. In that pause, you gain the only freedom that truly matters, the freedom to choose your response. Perspective becomes the central discipline. Not positive thinking, not denial, but accurate thinking. You learn to separate what has happened from the story you are telling yourself about what it means. You learn that events are neutral until interpreted. That loss is real, but despair is optional. That difficulty is unavoidable, but meaning is negotiable. This way of thinking does not promise happiness as a constant state. It promises stability. It offers a mind that is harder to shake, not because it is rigid, but because it is grounded in reality rather than expectation. Stoicism is not a philosophy for when life is easy. It is a philosophy for when life refuses to cooperate. It teaches you how to stand upright when certainty collapses, how to remain intact when outcomes disappoint, and how to preserve dignity when control slips away. It is not about becoming unfeeling. It is about becoming unbreakable in the only way that matters, by knowing exactly where your power ends and where it begins. If Stoicism gives structure to the inner world, its true strength is revealed when we look at who it was meant for and who actually lived by it. From its earliest days, Stoicism refused to belong to an elite few. It was never designed as a philosophy for scholars hiding behind walls, nor for thinkers detached from ordinary life. The Stoics taught in public spaces, under open skies, among merchants, laborers, soldiers, and rulers alike. Their message was simple and radical for its time. Wisdom is not a privilege. It is a human responsibility. What mattered to the Stoics was not where you were born, how much you own, or what title followed your name. What mattered was how you used your reason. They believed that every human being, regardless of status, possessed the same fundamental capacity to think clearly, to act justly, and to choose virtue over impulse. That belief alone made Stoicism dangerous. In a world built on rigid hierarchies, Stoicism quietly dismantled the idea that worth could be inherited or assigned. A former slave like Epictetus could speak with moral authority equal to any nobleman. A statesman like Seneca could argue that wealth added nothing to character. An emperor like Marcus Aurelius could remind himself that power did not exempt him from humility. Stoicism survived because it was tested at every level of human life. It endured slavery and exile, political intrigue and absolute power, poverty and abundance. Each time it proved the same point. External conditions change, but the demands of character remain. This universality extended beyond class. Stoics rejected the idea that philosophy was only for men. At a time when women were excluded from formal learning, Stoic teachers argued openly that women possessed the same capacity for virtue, discipline, and reason. To deny them education was not tradition, it was injustice. The Stoics also saw humanity as a single community. Long before globalization, they spoke of being citizens of the world. Borders, languages, and customs were secondary. What united people was shared rationality and shared responsibility. To harm another was, in a deeper sense, to harm oneself. This was not abstract idealism. It was a moral framework grounded in daily behavior. Justice was not a slogan. It was a practice. You were judged not by your beliefs, but by how you treated others when no one was watching. Stoicism never promised equality of outcome. It demanded equality of moral expectation. Everyone, regardless of circumstance, was held to the same standard. Act with reason, restraint, courage, and fairness. That standard was demanding. It offered no excuses, but it also offered dignity to anyone willing to live by it. This is why Stoicism has outlasted systems built on power, fear, or control. It does not depend on favorable conditions. It does not collapse when institutions fail. It asks only one question again and again. Given the role you have been assigned by fate, how will you choose to act? And that question remains just as alive today as it was 2,000 years ago. What made Stoicism endure across centuries is that it was never meant to stay in the past. It was built to meet reality wherever it appears, including the world you're living in right now. Modern life may look different on the surface, but the inner pressures remain strikingly familiar. We wake up each day surrounded by expectations, some spoken, most implied. We are told what success should look like, how quickly it should arrive, and how visible it must be to count. Metrics replace meaning, speed replaces reflection, and quietly, almost unnoticed, our sense of self becomes tied to outcomes we barely influence. Stoicism speaks most clearly here. One of its most unsettling insights is that disappointment is rarely caused by events themselves. It is caused by surprise. We are not undone by difficulty. We are undone by difficulty we did not expect. When reality deviates from the script we rehearsed in our minds, frustration follows. Anger feels justified. Anxiety feels inevitable. The Stoics trained themselves to expect disruption, not as pessimists, but as realists. They understood that life does not owe consistency. By rehearsing loss in advance, they reduced its power when it arrived. This practice was not about anticipating misery, it was about preserving composure. That is why voluntary discomfort mattered so deeply to them. Choosing simplicity, enduring cold, or living with less was not self-punishment. It was preparation. It reminded them that comfort is not a requirement for dignity, and that fear often dissolves once its object is faced directly. When you know you can endure less, you stop clinging desperately to more. Contrast this with the modern environment. Advertising thrives on convincing you that satisfaction lies just beyond your current reach, that fulfillment requires an upgrade, a milestone, a visible achievement. When these expectations fail, as they often do, the mind turns inward and assigns blame. Stoicism interrupts that cycle by relocating value. Instead of asking whether life is giving you what you want, it asks whether you are responding well to what you are given. The focus shifts from acquisition to alignment, from recognition to integrity. Consider how this applies to work, creativity, or ambition. You can control your preparation, your discipline, and your consistency. You cannot control timing, reception, or reward. Yet many people reverse that equation, attaching their worth to applause and their despair to silence. The Stoic response is not to abandon goals, but to redefine success. Effort becomes the measure. Character becomes the standard. When outcomes are treated as preferred, but not required, they lose the ability to destabilize you. This reframing has profound psychological effects. Failure no longer signals inadequacy, it signals incomplete information. Delay no longer implies defeat, it implies process. Even rejection, when examined closely, reveals more about circumstance than about identity. Stoicism also offers relief from comparison, one of the quietest sources of modern suffering. When worth is externally defined, comparison is inevitable and endless. There will always be someone ahead, someone faster, someone more visible. Stoicism dissolves this competition by insisting that the only meaningful comparison is internal. Are you responding today with more clarity than yesterday? This does not make life easier. It makes it cleaner. Emotional noise is reduced, energy is conserved, attention returns to what is actionable. In moments of stagnation, Stoicism teaches patience without passivity. In moments of loss, it teaches grief without collapse. In moments of success, it teaches restraint without guilt. Each response is guided by the same principle. Do not surrender your inner balance to forces that were never yours to command. Over time, this discipline produces an unexpected result. You become less reactive, not because you care less, but because you see more. You stop wasting strength resisting what cannot be changed and begin investing it where it still matters. Stoicism does not promise control over life. It promises something quieter and more durable. Control over your participation in it. And in a world defined by volatility, that may be the most practical form of freedom available. And when you follow this way of living long enough, something subtle begins to change. Not in the world around you, but in the way you stand within it. Stoicism ultimately resolves not in control, but in character. At its foundation are four virtues, not as abstract ideals, but as daily disciplines. Wisdom teaches you to see clearly, to distinguish what belongs to you from what never did. Courage asks you to endure discomfort without resentment and to resist corruption without drama. Temperance reminds you that enough is not deprivation, but balance. And justice pulls you outward, insisting that your strength is incomplete if it serves only yourself. Justice for the Stoics was never optional. They believed human beings were born for one another, bound together by reason and responsibility. To live well was not merely to remain calm, but to act rightly, especially when no reward followed. Power, success, and survival were meaningless if they came at the cost of integrity. This is why Stoicism has always been quiet about victory. It does not celebrate domination. It respects restraint. It recognizes that the most difficult battles are rarely visible and that the greatest strength is often shown in what you refuse to do. In this sense, Stoicism aligns closely with modern psychological insight. It understands that humans are sustained not by pleasure alone, but by meaning. Even in suffering, a life can remain intact if it is oriented toward purpose. Even in loss, dignity can survive if one's values do not collapse alongside circumstances. Stoicism never promised safety. It promised coherence. It offered a way to remain whole when the world fragments, and to move forward without bitterness when outcomes disappoint. You do not control how long your life will be. You do not control how it will end, but you do control how you meet each moment that leads there. That choice, repeated quietly over time, becomes a kind of victory that cannot be taken from you.